So let's talk specifically about shoulder external rotation when we have the arms overhead in our yoga poses. So I definitely know that it is very common to be taught in yoga teacher trainings that it's very important that we teach our students to externally rotate their shoulders in all of these poses. This is a super widespread teaching in the yoga world. It's very long standing, it's really traditional. But I would suggest that based on our understanding, like our modern current understanding of how the body moves and how mechanisms for pain and all of this, I would suggest that it's actually not necessary to insist that our students consciously, intentionally, volitionally, externally rotate in these poses. So that's my perspective, and that's based on my understanding of the current research. That's why I don't ask students and really encourage them to do that. But again, I know that this is very common and widespread, and this may be the first time that you're hearing of someone suggest that like actually externally rotating might not be so important in our yoga poses. So what I'm going to present when I talk about this is two main points. The first point will be that we don't need to worry about making sure people externally rotate in order to avoid pain and injury in the shoulder. So traditionally, we've been taught that it's important to teach this because if people don't externally rotate, they can cause shoulder injury to like the rotator cuff. That's the traditional idea that I would suggest is outdated by the current research, but it's still totally kicking around in the yoga world. So I want to first just address that, and then I will talk about the fact that the other reason that I don't think we need to insist that people externally rotate in down dog is because, and warrior one and all the poses with our arms up, is because when we take our arms up overhead, we are already externally rotating. Moving into external rotation is just an inherent built in movement that happens anatomically, biomechanically when we take our arms overhead. So we don't really need to go out of our way to emphasize it because it's already happening. It's maybe a little redundant to insist on everybody doing that. So those are my main 2 points. So let's back up first and just talk quickly about the injury mechanism one, because I think that this is one reason why people get really attached to this idea that external rotation is super important. So this whole idea that external rotation is important is connected to or based on what is now an outdated model of shoulder injury, shoulder pain, rotator cuff pain. And that's this old model that is not really supported by like modern researchers and evidence-based clinicians today. But it used to be thought that if you brought your arm up overhead and if you did not externally rotate, there were these ideas that that would cause tissues in the shoulder joint to kind of pinch together. So specifically, the supraspinatus tendon, that's one of our rotator cuff muscles, and a bursa, your subacromial bursa, which is a fluid-filled sac in the shoulder joint. So the idea was external rotation. We had to intentionally do that it was like crucial in order to make sure that those tissues are not impinged. But it turns out that that whole idea was put forth by a surgeon, not a researcher, but a surgeon. His name was Charles Neer, and he worked back in the 1970s. And he just had this idea that the patients that he saw who had shoulder pain with bringing their arm overhead, that they had like a narrow subacromial space. That's what it's called, this narrow space that was more likely to pinch the shoulder tissues. So he put forth this idea that there was something called shoulder impingement, and that in order to avoid that, and in order to avoid the associated pain and injury that might come from that, we must make sure, that we create more space there, and we do that by bringing the arms into external rotation. So, but his that was just an idea. It was never tested in the research. It was just based on like his own personal observations of having patients. But and also it was the 1970s, and it's like been a lot, it's been many decades since then, and we just know a lot more since that time. So what we know today is that people can have a wide variety of bony morphology in the shoulder joint when we're talking about the subacromial space and the acromion process and the distance between that and the head of the humerus. Like everyone's shoulder joints can be different, and there people can have a narrow space in there So that would be something that the surgeon Charles Neer from the 1970s, he hypothesized that that narrow space would make one more likely to feel pain and injury, but taking the arm overhead. But it turns out that that's not the case, and that the shape of one's acromion process does not correlate with rotator cuff injury and with pain. Like there's no correlation there anyway. It was an idea, but it was never tested. Now it's been tested. We know from research there's not a connection between the structure of the shoulder joint and whether people are more likely to experience shoulder quote impingement. So that idea is not really it's not really supported by current research. And then on top of that, this is what's even bigger about all of this is that now we have a lot of research trials that have been done where they've tested this procedure that Charles Neer was famous for inventing, which was called subacromial decompression. And this was the surgery that a shoulder surgeon would do where they would literally shave down the bone in the shoulder joint to make more space. Subacromial decompression, like it decompresses and makes more space for the supposed tissues that are supposedly creating this pain. But so he invented the surgery, and so many people have been treated with the surgery who have shoulder pain. But we now know from modern research that subacromial decompression surgery performed by surgeons does no better for relieving shoulder pain. It does no better than sham surgery, where the surgeons like went in, but they didn't actually change anything. They did not shave down the bone or change the structure of the shoulder joint. There's no difference, and people still felt better at the same rate. So whether they actually had the actual real surgery that changed the structure of the shoulder joint or whether they did not, there was there was no difference in the likelihood of getting out of pain. And furthermore, research has also shown that subacromial decompression surgery performs no better than physical therapy, which physical therapy is exercises and movement to address the pain. But physical therapy does not change the structure of the shoulder joint. The only thing that does that is actually shaving down the bone. So basically, this subacromial decompression surgery is like highly questioned today as something that is necessary because a lot of people can get out of pain having a sham surgery that didn't even make the change, or by just doing physical therapy, which doesn't change anything structurally at the joint. So basically, all of that is just to suggest that whatever it was that was creating people's pain when they took their arms up overhead was probably not about, or it's unlikely, it's questionable that it was specifically those specific tissues being like compressed in the shoulder joint. That was the idea. That was like the old theory that like that's what was happening. But we know now that pain is super multifactorial and complex, and that many factors from the biological, psychological, and social realm and biomechanical can all feed into whether someone experiences pain. So if someone has pain when taking their arm overhead, it could be due to so many factors, and it's very complex. And we really want to, when it comes to understanding like injury prevention and the research on that, we want to understand that we want to avoid single factor thinking and like blaming anyone's shoulder pain specifically on it must be these tissues being pinched or compressed, and we must therefore externally rotate to like alleviate the pain, or we must make more space there to alleviate the pain. It's just basically a much bigger, more complex picture than these older, kind of oversimplified ideas about pain and injury in general in the body. But this is the specific, like applying those old ideas to specifically the shoulder and the rotator cuff. So I know I kind of explained that for a while, but I think it's important that we understand. And I'm going to flash up just some resources or some references by actual researchers that are kind of more exemplary of the current take on shoulder pain, and also suggesting that this whole idea of the term shoulder impingement, which is like the old term that was used since the 1970s. Now, like modern clinicians and researchers are really advocating that we abandon the use of that term completely because impingement just has these negative connotations that can maybe incite some fear and create like fear avoidance, kinesiophobia of moving the arm, and maybe have some nocibic effects. Like it could just not be good. It can plant seeds. It maybe can plant seeds in people's mind that can potentially contribute to an experience of pain when there was like no pain before, or it can make pain worse. So the suggestion is like, we don't even talk about impingement. That's probably not the mechanism at play anyway. And it's scary. So let's like throw that term out the window. And now there seems to be a push that instead of using the term shoulder impingement, it's being replaced by the term rotator cuff related shoulder pain. That's like one camp of evidence-based clinicians and researchers are arguing for that to be the new term, but there's also another term that's also being put forth, which is just subacromial pain, like pain in the area of the subacromial region. But other researchers don't like that idea because it's too overly specific to one location. And really, we don't know exactly where and exactly what is involved. So anyway, all of that is to just bring this back to downward facing dog and warrior one and our yoga poses, is just to suggest that it is not important that all of our yoga students, like as a whole, as this like universal way that we teach our poses, it's not important that we insist that they go out of their way to externally rotate in order to create space in the shoulder joint, because it is probably not lack of space in the shoulder joint that's like a main single factor that's contributing to anything that's related to rotator cuff pain to begin with. It's probably not a mechanism and definitely not a single factor mechanism and blah, blah, blah. It's like the outdated model. So hopefully it makes a little more clear one of the two reasons why I don't think it's important that we insist. I don't think that when people come into down dog, I don't think we have to tell them that they must wrap the outer upper arms back. Like that would be a cue to try to get external rotation happening. Like there are a lot of different ways that we can suggest the same movement without saying externally rotate your shoulders. Because many of our students are not like anatomically savvy. They probably don't know what that means. Plus it's confusing when the arms are overhead. It's kind of an opposite. It's like counterintuitive to externally rotate versus when they're down by our sides. Maybe it's a little clearer. So anyway, just saying that like we sometimes hear wrap the triceps back, wrap the outer upper arms back in order to make external rotation happen. Or sometimes we'll hear turn the eyes of your elbows forward, because that's another way to externally rotate the shoulders. So there are these just kind of default cues that we're often taught in our yoga teacher trainings that we always give those in down dog because that's part of the alignment that we want people to find. I suggest that I don't think that they're necessary and I don't think that they're important. And, they're definitely not bad. I wouldn't suggest that they're bad or that they're harmful or that that it's bad to give them. But I think what we want to do with all of our yoga cues is take a step back and just ask, why are we giving any cue in the moment? Like, what's our intention? What's our reason? If our reason for insisting on people externally rotating the shoulders when the arms are overhead, whether it's down dog, warrior one, etc., if our reason is that we're trying to help them avoid injury, then that would not be an evidence-based or science-supported reason, not currently in this year with all of our modern understanding of the body and pain science. So if that's your reason, if that's one's reasons for giving such cues, we can understand that we just don't need to say that. It's like not important for such reasons. Now, I said a little while ago that I was going to talk about the pain and injury thing with the arms overhead, but that I was also just going to explain that when we bring our arms overhead, we have external rotation built in anyway. We're already externally rotating when the arms come overhead. So again, it's a little redundant to give that as a cue. So if your reason for giving the cue, maybe it wasn't so much about the injury thing. Maybe you didn't learn that in your yoga teacher training. Maybe you weren't taught that, but maybe you were just taught this is just the cue we always give in down dog. Maybe there wasn't a reason attached to why, which is why a course like this is so helpful, I think, because this is uncovering for us and revealing the real whys behind our cues so we can make more conscious and intentional decisions. But many yoga teacher trainings will give you just like a list of cues that you memorize, and those are the ones that you give. And that's very common in down dog and also in all of our arms overhead. It's very common that we're taught like, well, it's just what you do. You just take the arms up and then you externally rotate, and you should teach that. So if that's your reason for giving the cue, I would just suggest that we don't really need to give that cue, because when the arms go overhead, we're already externally rotating. Maybe this will be a little easier to see if I demo it like this. Let's just say I want to take my arms up overhead, but I want to do it like in this direction by taking my arms back. So can you see how if I take my arms back, and you could even try this yourself, just like right now, stand up and try to take your arms back, you'll run into this like bony block where you just can't lift them any higher. Oh, I'm blocked there. And the only way we can lift up is if we externally rotate to make the space, and then we could take our arms up. So just to show, like, we cannot lift our arms up overhead without externally rotating. And I just think you can see that a little better if we show it in this direction, this arms back and up. But you could also see it in arms out and up. So moving through abduction, shoulder abduction, if you take your arms out. But if if you don't externally rotate, just go straight out, there's kind of like a spot where it's stop, you just can't go any further unless you spin your palms up, and that's external rotation at the shoulder, and then you have the space to take your arms overhead. So if you take your arms out and up and you don't act like, if you go out of your way to not externally rotate, you just won't be able to take them all the way up. The only way you can do it is if you externally rotate. And same for arms forward and up. So hopefully that makes sense. When our arms go overhead, we have to move through external rotation in order to take them overhead. So we don't need to go out of our way to pick out this one singular direction of movement and tell our yoga students that they must do it because they're already doing it. So it's a little redundant and just kind of unnecessary. It's just one of those, in my opinion, one of those detailed alignment cues that we just don't really need. We don't need to say, at least in a default way, as like a universal cue that we always give, is like, that's the cue for that pose. We don't need to say that. It's not inherently bad to use the cue, but like I said, it's just about our intention and why we're using the cue in any given moment. We want to work on shoulder mobility, then yeah, maybe let's teach it in that moment with that specific intention. And we might as well do external all the way to internal. It doesn't just need to be external. But on the whole, using that as just a default cue that we always give in these poses to like all students, I don't think that that's necessary. It's not something that I do in my practice, and I don't think it's important for injury prevention.